Mind mapping can be broken down into 3 different levels of skill. When mind mapping is done at a skill level of level 3, it's legitimately one of the most powerful learning techniques that you can master. It improves your memory, it increases your processing speed, it makes it easier to think about more content more deeply. But when mind mapping is done at level 1, it can be a complete waste of time. For me, being able to do a level 3 mind map every time is a big part of what gave me the confidence to run a business full-time while going through medical school, and then later my full-time masters, for which I ranked first in my year. Now, the first step in actually being able to level up your mind mapping is to be able to look at a mind map and identify what level it's at. Once we can figure out the difference between the different levels of mind map, we can then focus on the processes that help us bridge each of these levels. So I'll show you some examples of each level of mind maps, see if you can spot the difference. So these ones are level 1, and then these ones here are level 2. And these are some level 3. Now, you might think that the main difference is that a level 3 mind map just looks simpler or more comprehensive, but it is so much more than that. And the difference between a level 1 and a level 3 is probably the difference that separates a top 30% learner from a top 1% learner. But before we get into that, let's take a deep dive into level 1. So here's the example of the level 1 mind map again. Now, the level 1 mind map has 2 important characteristics. The first thing is that it has non-linearity of ideas. So if you have a look at this, you can see that it's not just going left to right down the page. All of these things, it's trying to represent the ideas spatially around the page. And the second thing is that there are connections between the ideas. You can see that they're trying to express these connections with these lines and arrows. Now, the difference is actually a lot more obvious when we go back a level to what's even before level 1, which is level 0 note-taking. And level 0 note-taking looks a little bit more like this. And these are actually my old notes from like over 10 years ago. And I can tell you that the thousands of hours I spent on writing notes like these were ultimately a waste of time. So at level 0, there are 5 characteristics that you should definitely avoid. Firstly, it's very linear. Secondly, it's usually very wordy. And thirdly, it's pretty superficial. It doesn't go into the content very deeply. It doesn't really look at how ideas are related to each other, because frankly, trying to write that all down through level 0 linear note-taking would be completely overwhelming. There's often a lot of highlighting, and sometimes there's a lot of annotating. And at the end of the day, it is uselessly time-consuming in that it takes a lot of time, but it's not really helping with our retention or our depth of understanding. So level 1 really represents this first point where someone's trying to break this old linear mold. But the important thing is not to just recognize the characteristics of each level, it's to know what the process is that takes you from level 0 to level 1. And there are 3 key processes that someone is engaging in to go from level 0 to level 1. The first process is that they're looking at how they can use arrows and lines to represent information instead of just writing it out as full sentences. So no full sentences. The second thing is that we're trying to cut down on how wordy it is. We're often doing a little bit more summarizing. And the third part is getting a little bit more comfortable with just representing information spatially and without using words. When we follow these processes, we go from level 0 to level 1. Now, at level 1, we're not really getting a strong benefit from mind mapping. The real power of mind mapping comes from level 2 and level 3, and in fact, level 1 often looks pretty messy. However, level 1 is not bad. Mind mapping is a skill, and like any other skill, there are levels to that skill, and you can't just skip a level. Level 1 is necessary because it allows us to break out from level 0 to then work towards level 2. Kind of like training wheels on a bicycle. And a lot of people will say, oh, I gave mind mapping a go, it didn't really work for me. But they actually only reached level 1. And you're right, if you only reach level 1, it's not really gonna work for you. So let's have a look at level 2, where you should see some benefit. Here's an example of the level 2 mind maps again. And once we're at this level 2 skill, we should be feeling a lot more comfortable with expressing information non-linearly. And at level 2, there are 3 characteristics to look out for. First of all, we have groups of information. And these groups are related to each other. And as a result, there is a clearer flow or structure to the information. You can see these groups being represented here in the brown, as well as the flow of information with the arrows being a little bit cleaner. And if your mind map has these characteristics, it's probably at level 2. And by the way, let me know what level you are in the comments so that I can help cater my future videos to you. So now that we know what a level 2 mind map looks like, let's think about what the processes are that take us from level 1 to level 2. There are, again, 3 main processes that we want to focus on here. The first one is that we're thinking a little bit more about how ideas are similar or different to each other. And by thinking about how similar things are to each other, this allows us to put them into groups. We're arranging them by those similarities. Number 2, we're now thinking about how the information actually flows and influences each other. We've created these groups, we've looked at how things might be related and similar to each other, and we're thinking, how do these ideas connect together in a coherent structure? Which leads to number 3, we're actually thinking about intentionally creating more of a structure, as opposed to, for example, just drawing a bunch of lines and arrows connecting things all over the place. And overall, the difference between level 1 and level 2, the major difference, is that we're spending a lot more time thinking about how we want to arrange the information and organize it, as opposed to just getting used to organizing it non-linearly. And by thinking about how to organize the information in level 2 and later also in level 3, we're forcing our brain to engage in that higher order thinking, which is one of the most important cognitive processes that you can do to understand, remember, and apply what you learned properly. In fact, the OECD has even come out with a statement saying that higher order thinking skills is one of the most crucial things that a modern day learner needs to know to be successful. So what that means is that if you are mind mapping and you're not noticing improvements in your understanding or your memory or your ability to apply the information, it probably means that you're not engaging at that higher order of thinking. And that would be common because most people tend to avoid higher order thinking since it takes more mental effort and it can feel uncomfortable, which basically means most people are avoiding the type of thinking that helps build stronger memory and deeper understanding in the first place. This is famously called the misinterpreted effort hypothesis, which I've talked about in lots of my other videos. And this is important because there's essentially no point in using mind mapping as a technique if we're not engaging in the right type of thinking. And it's actually really easy to demonstrate the difference between level 0, level 1, and level 2. So I'll show you using this article on metacognition, which is just taken from Wikipedia. It could be from a textbook or from lecture slides. It doesn't really matter. This is just a demonstration. So at level 0, let me show you what my note-taking would look like. I'll type it out for you so that you don't have to struggle reading through my handwriting. So as I'm writing these notes, all I'm doing is I'm reading a sentence, I'm summarizing it a little, I'm transcribing it down. Honestly, I may as well have just used ChatGPT or something to do this because it takes no mental effort and my brain is almost asleep. No real learning is happening in the brain. Now, there actually is a way to still do linear notes while still getting level 3 results. And I'll show you that one later. Okay, so I'll just end that demonstration there because I'm losing brain cells. Let me do the same passage at level 1. And so here, as I'm writing, I'm mentally doing the same thing. I'm basically just reading a sentence, I'm summarizing it a little, maybe a little bit more concisely, and then I'm just writing it down. And I'm basically just looking to see if it's connected to anything else really obviously, and I'm putting some lines and arrows down. As we are progressing, you can see it's starting to get a little messy, and honestly, like, it's already kind of overwhelming in terms of just there's a lot of lines and arrows going everywhere. And this is usually when a lot of students will say it's not working, since it might actually feel worse than just linear notes, which are at least easier to read. But anyway, that was level 1, same content, same stuff, but done through level 1 mind mapping. And you can see some similarities with the examples that I showed you before. So now let's do level 2, exactly the same content again. Now here, there's a big difference in thinking compared to before, because instead of just going sentence by sentence and putting it down, I'm actually reading more. I'm actually thinking about it back and forth. I'm actively deciding how I want to structure this information in a way that makes sense. And I'm also actively trying to group related ideas together. You can see it's looking tidier, there's more groups, it's a little bit easier to follow, and it's actually a lot more engaging. In fact, it's actually even a little bit fun, and I can feel that the information sticks in my head a lot more easily, while at level 0 and then level 1, I barely remember what I wrote down. Also, it's a little hard to see from the video, but the time I spent just thinking about what to write before even writing anything down in the first place is a lot longer. So at level 0 and level 1, I'm basically writing something every 5 or 10 seconds. I'm pretty much writing non-stop. And at level 2, I'm thinking about things for like 20 or 30 seconds or even more before even writing it down, because I'm just trying to think about how I want to arrange it. That's actually one really good way to see if you're thinking about things enough to learn effectively. It shouldn't really be possible to think at level 2 depth and also write constantly. So that is level 2, and now going from level 0 to level 2 is probably enough to give you a decent little grade bump of like 10 to 15%. But level 3 is where you start seeing some serious improvements. Now, before we go into what a level 3 mind map looks like, I just want to preface by saying that mind mapping is a complex skill. It took me like over a decade of trial and error and reading research to really master it. And I'm glad that I did, because I'm able to save time for you with videos like these. But what about other skills that are not mind mapping? Brilliant question. And Brilliant is the answer. Brilliant is a sponsor of today's video, and it is where you learn by doing. You learn by experimenting, solving problems, making mistakes, and learning from them. They have thousands of interactive lessons on subjects like data analysis, math, programming, and AI. Brilliant helps you to build knowledge that you can learn and then apply within minutes. You can also fit it in whenever you've got time, which helps to build a habit of learning something useful every single day. And their hands-on problem-solving approach makes it much faster and more fun than the traditional boring old lesson. It's an opportunity to train your critical thinking and real-world problem-solving skills, which are part of those crucial higher order thinking skills that I mentioned earlier, as opposed to the normal kind of pointless memorization, which is very lower order. Brilliant has recently launched a bunch of new lessons on data analysis and probability, which is a subject that I'm personally pretty interested about. It uses real world data and trains you on how to find trends to make better decisions. It's perfect for learners at any level, and you also get to see the real data from companies like Starbucks, X, and Spotify. To try everything that Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, go to brilliant.org/JustinSung or click the link in the description. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription if you use that link. Now, let's dive back into the level 3 mind maps, which is where the real power of mind maps comes in. Here's an example of mind maps at level 3 again. And there are 3 characteristics that you need to know at level 3. The first thing is that the structure and flow is much clearer. You can clearly see where the information is going throughout this map. Number 2, there's more emphasis to some groups and arrows over others. For example, you can see that these arrows are a little bit thicker compared to, for example, these arrows. That visually indicates the importance of information and relationships. And this last one is harder to notice, but the groups themselves are more intuitive and easier to remember. So if we kind of zoom in a little bit here, we can see that the actual name of the groups that have been used are not always the same terminology that is taught for the topic. They've actually relabeled the group so it makes more sense for them at an intuitive level. It's actually easier to understand the difference between level 2 and 3 by talking about the processes that we need to engage in to go from level 2 to level 3. Now, by the time we're at a level 3 skill, we're used to writing non-linear notes. We're used to thinking about how things are similar. We're used to grouping things together. We're used to creating structures and flows. What we're focusing on with the process at level 3 is the quality. So we're improving the quality of the connections and relationships that we're forming. We're also increasing the quality, and when I say quality, I'm talking about how intuitive the groups that we're forming are. Yeah, sure, we can connect this group to this group. We can connect these ideas to these other ideas. We can group these things together, sure. But which way of grouping is actually the best for us? Which makes the most sense, which is the most intuitive, which feels like it's gonna be stickier in our memory? Which means, number 3, we have to spend time to identify alternatives and then make an actual judgment on which one is the best. For example, here's that little map that I made before at level 2, and then here is the exact same map with essentially the exact same information, but just grouped and structured differently. So at level 3, I'm actually thinking about these alternative ways of structuring the information and arranging them in a way that makes more sense to me. At level 3, our mind maps are becoming cleaner, more intuitive, more deliberate. The lines and the arrows and everything that I'm putting on there is more intentional. Now, for most people, the difference between level 2 and level 3 may not seem like much. After all, we're still just grouping and organizing information. But the difference between level 2 and level 3 in terms of how much it affects your performance and results and memory and depth of understanding is probably more than the difference between going from level 0 all the way through to level 2. Being able to create a level 3 mind map consistently is very uncommon and probably translates to a roughly top 10% level of performance. In fact, the type of thinking that you have to do for a level 3 mind map is so crucial that virtually any top 1 or 2% learner is going to be thinking in this way, even if they're not using mind maps as the technique. Mentally, they're engaging in those same higher order thinking processes and patterns, which is why earlier I said that it is actually possible to do level 0 linear note taking, but still get level 3 types of results. And let me show you how. So just going back to my article on metacognition here, I'm gonna do the pseudo level 3 note taking with linear notes here. So as I do this, just notice how I'm spending a lot of time reading and when I'm writing, I'm not actually just reading things and writing things down. I'm actually thinking about it and synthesizing it, and I'm doing all of that higher order thinking and grouping and thinking about how things are related to each other. I'm doing that all mentally as I read, and then I'm writing down like my entire synthesis and structure. So it's almost like a mini essay where I'm trying to explain all the relationships and nuances of the content that I've read. And this is basically how you're able to get some people that are using what seems like a pretty mediocre method of note-taking, but they're getting great results because mentally what's going on is at a high level. But there are 2 specific reasons that you should not do this. First of all, it's honestly just much harder than doing the level 3 mind map. Because I'm having to do all the thinking in my head and all the processing, I can't track my thoughts and all the relationships that I'm thinking of on the mind map. So it's much harder for me to actually create the connections and organize my thoughts. Being able to just literally write it down and brainstorm the ideas as I go is probably 2 or even 3 times faster and easier than trying to do it all mentally and then just forcing it back down into a linear set of notes again. This is actually also the reason why you should use mind maps to plan literature reviews and essays. It's also probably 2 or 3 times more time consuming overall. Not just when I'm writing the notes, but later when I go to review the notes, I'm forcing myself to have to read through this entire thing all over again to extract the meaning from it. Whereas if I had just the mind map, I can just glance at it to review the structure in like seconds or minutes. And even though the mind map looks simpler, it's actually the same types of relationships and thoughts that as were in the essay. The essay is not a more comprehensive set of notes at all. In fact, the essay probably doesn't even cover all of the relationships that I'd be able to express in the mind map. The level 3 mind map is incomparably simpler, faster, and more organized. This synthesized essay writing thing that I just did, you can use that as a revision technique later instead. Now, if you found this video and you want even more to help you master the art and science of learning, then I've got a free weekly newsletter that I've created where I've taken my decade of coaching and distilled what really works into bite-sized emails. Each email contains a key concept to help you improve your memory, your depth of understanding, your ability to apply your knowledge, as well as a practical takeaway or a challenge. It's completely free, and the concepts that I talked about in this video are also included in one of those newsletters, as well as other concepts that I have never made any videos about. If you're interested, I'll leave a link for you to join that in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.